Charles Rolls helped build one of the most famous car companies in the world, but it wasn't a car that killed him. In 1910, at an air show in Bournemouth, he pushed early aviation too far and paid for it with his life. By the time the Honourable Charles Rolls travelled to Bournemouth by train in early July 1910, he was already a celebrated public figure, feted for achievements both in the air and on the road. He would have struck an imposing figure, standing a full 6'5" in height, probably a tad dishevelled, and most likely chain-smoking his way to the south coast. Rolls was heading to the Bournemouth International Aviation Meeting, which constituted part of the town's centenary celebrations. Rolls and another 18 intrepid early aviators were due to convene at an especially chosen 1-mile stretch of grassland on Hengistbury Head, Christchurch, between Tuckton and Doubledykes. The event organisers paid the landowners a generous £2,200 for the use of the tract, and a 4-pylon course with 2 surprisingly tight turns at the ends was soon laid out. The construction of the infrastructure of the airfield included its 4 covered grandstands and 15 hangars, progressed efficiently, and with the reported total cost of the meeting amounting to a not inconsiderable £22,000, thought to equate to several million Great British pounds in today's terms. Of the 19 competitors entered, 15 of them were British or Britain-based and included Rolls, as well as Bartram Dixon, Samuel Cody and Claude Graham White. 4 were foreign pilots of some renown: Frenchman Leon Moran and Louis Wagner, Belgium Joseph Christians and Swiss Edmund Audemars. A considerable prize fund of £8,000, over £1 million in 2024 values, was made available and was to be awarded across a range of disciplines. For example, a £1,000 prize would go to the winners of both speed and altitude contests. An £800 stipend would be paid to the winner of the overwater race from Hengistbury Head to the Needles Lighthouse at the western end of the Isle of Wight and back again. With no appearance fees on offer, pilots needed to compete and win to make the whole venture pay, perhaps especially the fiscally cautious Charles Rolls. Most of the competitors boarded at the Burlington Hotel in Buscombe, although it's not known if Rolls did. Despite his privilege and class, he could have easily slept with his plane in its hangar for all we know. Cecil Grace was the first to fly at 6 a.m. on Monday the 11th of July in his short S-27. A cracked cylinder head had been replaced, necessitating an engine test. Grace had not completed his first lap before the engine seized, necessitating an emergency landing. Unluckily for him, the landing path crossed a sunken road that had been filled with loose sand. This immediately arrested the short undercarriage, and the resulting stresses wrecked the aircraft. Grace was luckily unhurt, but no doubt reflected on the old adage that any landing that you walk away from is by definition and comparison indeed a good one. Charles Rolls had a more successful first morning, returning unscathed and with a complete aircraft following a 4-lap test flight. This must have reassured Rolls considerably, as he had commissioned some modifications to his French-built Wright Flyer and had been keen to test them. In an attempt to improve the craft's notoriously mercurial handling, the fixed horizontal rear stabilizer had been replaced with a movable elevator, which was coupled to the front elevator. This arrangement had been designed by Count Charles de Lambert and built by the Wright factory in France. It was a modification which ominously, however, did not carry the tacit approval of the Wright brothers. At around 11:45, Rolls took off for the first of his competition flights. He climbed to attain an official altitude of 971 feet before spiralling down to land after a flight of around 30 minutes. Before landing, however, he made an attempt at the slowest lap contest. With the throttle almost closed and the nose of the flyer pointing skyward, he achieved a 4-minute 13-second lap, which corresponds to an average speed of around 25 miles an hour. With all seeming well with the modifications, Rolls was up again at around 5 p.m. for an attempt at the altitude prize. This time he abandoned his attempt at around 900 feet, as his craft seemed not to be reacting predictably to his inputs. During his long descent, however, the issue seemed to correct itself, and once on the ground, no faults or issues were detected. Before that day's activities drew to a close, Rolls took a tilt at the 5-lap speed contest, posting a time of 14 minutes and 39 seconds. On the inaugural day of the competition, it was only Rolls' slowest lap attempt that proved anywhere near competitive. Tuesday the 12th of July marked the first day of the precision landing competition. It was a bright summer's morning, but a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind was gusting across the course towards the grandstands, making the challenge of the event all the more taxing. The aviators had to cross the start-finish line before landing within a painted circle with a 100-yard diameter. The circle contained a solid painted centre spot, and the winner would be the pilot who landed closest to it. Rolls was the third aviator to attempt the feat after Graham White and Oda Mars. Rolls turned left after the first pylon and then flew a low S-turn across the wind to land with the wind from behind and to his right. Possibly for this reason, he overshot the target by about 24 yards. For his second attempt just before 1 p.m, Rolls amended his strategy accordingly. This time he flew far outside the perimeter of the airfield and approached the target circle directly into the wind, scudding in from behind the grandstands. After clearing these not insignificant obstacles, he descended sharply and crossed the perimeter fence at only around 40 feet. Suddenly realizing that he could only substantially undershoot from that altitude and attitude, Rolls pulled sharply back on his elevator controls. Nearby spectators reported hearing a sharp crack as the aerodynamic forces suddenly overcame the structural integrity of the fragile struts supporting the retrofitted rear elevator assembly. The structural failure caused the right flyer to nose down dramatically, hitting the ground almost vertically. The craft flipped over onto its back and Rolls was thrown from his seat, finally landing on the inverted top wing. From the grandstands, Rolls didn't look badly injured. It soon became evident, however, that Hengistbury Head had become the scene of a national tragedy as policemen and officials formed a protective ring around the accident site. Rolls had succumbed to a violent concussion and would not leave the wreckage of his rudimentary flying machine alive. The Honourable Charles Rolls was less than 2 months shy of his 33rd birthday. Upon his untimely death, he attained the dubious distinction of being the first British subject of a heavier-than-air flight death. Only 10 others internationally are thought to precede Rolls in this ghoulish roll call. So what can we make of young Charles Rolls then? The overall impression he leaves me with is one of feverish activity and achievement. In his short life, he covered enough ground to fill 3 or 4 more conventional and conventionally longer lifetimes. And it's worth remembering at this juncture that the ramblings presented here are significantly condensed and with little mention made, intentionally I might add, of most of his aviation-based achievements. It's fair to say that his achievements in the air probably significantly outnumber those made on terra firma too. Given all this, I don't think anyone could legitimately accuse Charles Rolls of letting the grass or any other type of flora grow under those unusually large and expensively brogued feet. Certainly any portrayal of Rolls as some sort of foppish Edwardian dandy or louche lascivious dilettante can most certainly be given shrift of the very shortest variety. Yes, he was privileged, well connected, and as the youngest child probably doted upon, but unlike so many blessed with similar benefits, he used them constructively, actively and astutely. His most oft-reported traits seem to be of a slight lack of sartorial direction for a man of his means, a thriftiness that bordered on stinginess at times, and a moderate addiction to tobacco. By all accounts, he was no sort of a drinker, and history remains annoyingly stum about his sexual proclivities or his gambling habits, so let's assume they were normal or at least inoffensive. Given his short involvement in the Rolls-Royce partnership, which amounted to just 5 years of activity in essence, there are others who can lay claim to having had more impact on the mark. Henry Royce and Claude Johnson are the most obvious candidates, of course, but there are others. However, it seems to me that Rolls' privilege and rarefied connections, combined with his unceasing enthusiasm and support for the marque, set its trajectory towards greatness from the get-go, a bit like an intrepid ship's captain setting in a course and leaving others to execute it safely and effectively. Whatever your standpoint, there surely can be few other 32-year-olds that prematurely perished over 100 years ago whose legacy can so readily and undilutedly be recognised and appreciated today. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Andrew, the Classic Car Guy, and please follow or subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Happy motoring!